our thoughts and the way that we think doesn't get very far away from that core part of our personality and our connection to masculine energy. And in so many ways, thoughts are a more masculine energy. Anyway, with that example of like if your sun signs in Aries, like your Mercury can only be in Pisces, Aries, or Taurus. If you think about like, okay, how would someone who's an Aries, who expresses so much like passion and instinct and take action kind of energy generally, like, okay, how is their brain functioning and their communication style if it's in Pisces versus it's in Taurus versus it's in Aries? And you can start to see how people get flavored and how things start showing up for them.
Welcome to the Feminine Alchemy Podcast, where we explore the truth about the feminine, the peaceful, the wild, and the visceral. I'm your host, Jan Behringer, joined by my co-hosts, Julie Dean Richards and Kaylee Rose. Each week, we explore the deep mysteries of the feminine and help listeners apply them to their daily lives in a practical way. Join us to unlock the hidden wisdoms your soul has been waiting for. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Feminine Alchemy. I am Jan, and we've got Julie Dean Richards and Kaylee Rose on with us. Say hi.
Hello.
Today, we are continuing. I know people have been wanting this, very excited about this. We are continuing our foray into astrology, getting into the basics of astrology, and we're talking about the planets and what they mean, right? So when we were talking about, I think it was houses, it's like, these are the actors, right? So before we get into that, we are going to do our get to know you question. And since we're talking all about planets and we're all astrologers, we're all going to talk about what is your favorite planet or luminary or point or asteroid? Who wants to go first?
I know which one. I think that should be Kaylee's.
I was thinking
Oh my
that too.
gosh, that's too funny. I'm super
Even
curious.
though I was like, I suggested this question. I don't even know which one is mine. But I can tell you which one I think Kaylee should have. Should I say that one?
Tell us that. I love this. I love this.
I think Kaylee's should be the moon because she's the moon goddess. That should be her.
Yes.
Is that what you were thinking, Kaylee?
It crossed my mind. It definitely crossed my mind.
But who did you think instead? Who are you picking?
Well, I had a hard time too. When you posed the question, I was like, my favorite? I don't know. But like what popped into my head was actually Pluto and Ceres, because they are the two that I feel like I have the most. Well, Pluto, I have lots and lots of experience working with his energy. Lots. And then Ceres, I've been on kind of like a deep dive of healing around her energy and just opening up to this like great mother kind of energy that she can definitely bring to the table.
Oh, I think that's great. That was way better than my answer. I honestly, I don't know that I have a particular answer necessarily to this. I do love the moon a lot. I love it quite. I'm a Cancer. I'm ruled by the moon. I'm a reflector. I'm ruled by the moon. So I have a deep connection to her, and I have always loved her energy, everything that she can give. But, I think those harder planets, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about Saturn, and I don't love Saturn, but like apparently some part of me does, because I wanted to live on a Saturn line for like ever and like be in Saturn's presence for like ever. And now I'm going back to him. He just like keeps pulling me back. So, but I do think he does give us those, karmic lessons that we so desperately need. And he does create mastery, which I think I value. I value a lot of that mastery piece that he brings. But I do love, anyway, I'm sure as we go through all the planets, I will say I love all of them, because I do love every single one of those. But I wanted to be cool like Kaylee and give like a deep, harder answer. What about you, Jan?
Well, Lilith is my favorite point.
Who?
always has been. I think that for a long time, and I don't know if it's completely true or if it was the time of my life, but I felt very embodied with Lilith, just really, really in that zone of like, I don't care what you think of me. I'm going to do what I want, all of those things. And I have a Sun Lilith conjunction, which I always thought, like when I first learned about astrology, I was like, oh, that means I am the worst. I'm probably evil and
No.
terrible. So I like worked really hard to like not be evil and terrible, and then I realized that's not what that means. So then I did shadow work, and la la la, here we are. But along those lines, I also really resonate well with Pluto. So right now, kind of messing with my hair, sitting, put his fingers in my hair, and I'm like, why? Seriously, dude, we're supposed to be besties. What's wrong with you? So, but I love the concept of just like complete transformation. Like when you build something from nothing, that's a Pluto thing to do. Because there was nothing there and now there's something, like that's total transformation. Or when you take something and turn it into nothing, like that's transformation too. And I just always have loved total transformation. But I have stuff in my chart that's like, yeah, you should do the weird stuff. You should do a little bit tweaked things, but in a good way. Yeah, that's Pluto. That's my thing. So let's keep going. We're going to start this whole conversation with the big three because we never actually talked about them. So this is supposed to be the planets episode, but we're going to talk about more than just planets because we never actually talked about the rising sign, even with all the other house angles that we did talk about. We have not talked about the moon and we've not talked about the sun. And so those three are technically not planets. The sun and the moon are luminaries, and the rising sign is a data point. So, what do these things mean?
Should we start with one in particular, or do you want like to describe the big three as a whole?
Yeah, when somebody says, "What's your big three?" I think that like people get the whole "What's your sun sign?" Like, what sign are you? But what does it mean? Like, why do we care about these three things? First of all,
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start because the more you interact with astrology, that's going to be the first thing that you bump up against is what's your sun, moon, and rising, which is the big three. We call them the big three. And the reason that we call the sun, the moon sign, and the rising sign the big three is because they make up a bulk. They're like the big rocks that we put in the jar that tell us about, okay, this is the base of your personality. These are your emotional needs and your psychology. And this is what your body looks like and how people interact with you when they first bump up against your energy. There's just very foundational to who you are. And it's a lot easier to understand yourself once you understand those three things. And so, for people who don't know astrology, if you're listening to this and you've gotten this far, you probably learned a lot. But the month you're born in, that will determine your sun sign. So, like, if I was born, between October 1st and November 21st, then I'm going to be a Scorpio. And that's like that month. Or if you're born between like June 1st and July 21st or 23rd or something, that will make you a Cancer. So that's your sun sign. So when we say like, what's your sun sign? That's what we're talking about. It's determined by the month you were born in. The moon sign is determined by where the moon was, what sign was the moon in when you were born. So the moon actually moves every 2.5 days to a new sign about that. And so she is constantly shifting. And so it's very likely, unless you're born near the new moon or you're born on a balsamic moon, that your moon sign will be different than your sun sign. So you've got a sun sign, a moon sign, which is determined by where the moon was in the sky when you were born. And then the ascendant is about the horizon line. Where was the light? Where's the horizon when you were born? And the horizon shifts incredibly rapidly. That's why your birth time is very, very important to when you were born, because that horizon line, which will shift all the angles and the aspects, which we'll talk about later, will shift. So those are what the big three are and how they are determined. So Kaylee, why don't you talk about like, if you want to, you can totally add to that, but you want to talk about like what the sun means, what the moon means, and the rising.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that, especially because I love talking about the sun and the moon. But So as far as the moon's or the sun sign, rather, we'll start with the sun sign. The sun sign has, like, the sun in general, the sun itself in your chart has a lot to do with like your creative spark and like what keeps you kind of vibrant and alive. It has a lot to do with your personality, especially your personality as you show up in the more external world. Whereas the moon and where she was at the moment of your birth tells you a lot more about your inner world, your emotions, your intuition, what you need for emotional safety. And um and then you have the ascendant, which in a lot of ways is like, okay, this is the energy that people bump into first when they interact with you. It's like the almost this like outer layer of, hey, this person feels like a Leo or like a Sagittarius or like whatever, and it has a lot to do with first impressions. But that ascendant is also in a lot of ways like your awakening awareness, and actually, the longer you're alive, the more likely you are to express the energy of your ascendant because it's also the energy that is flowing into your first house, and so it's very much a part of your body and very much a part of your lived experience. And as you awaken to that energy, you're able to take, I'm not sure how to phrase it, I guess like more aligned action with like who you are and where you want to be going. But to backtrack a tiny bit, I want to talk a little bit more about the sun and the moon because they are so vital. The sun, a lot of astrologers will talk about the sun being a representative of the father and father energy, and the moon representative of the mother and mother energy. But I like to take it a step further and say that the sun rules all masculine energy and the moon rules all feminine energy. And so in your chart, if you look at your sun and your moon, you get the foundational story of your interaction with masculine and feminine energy. And your interactions with masculine and feminine energy begin, you could say, in utero as you experience being part of this very feminine being. And it's not always your mother and it's not always your father, but your core mother figure and your core father figure from a very young age shapes a lot of who you are and then shapes your internal psyche, your inner mother and your inner father and your connection to masculine and feminine energy. And so that sun and that moon, where they are, can give you so much vital information about your psyche, how it was formed, what hangups you might have around your own development, and how to step into a more empowered version of all of that energy.
I love it. I love it. That was like such a quick, deep foray into the sun and the moon. It's so great. I will say for people who want like little tricks to remember things, if you're born on the new moon in the morning, then you have 3 of the same sign. So say you're Cancer, but you were born on the new moon and you were born at 7 o'clock in the morning, you're going to be a triple Cancer. So think about that too, so that way you can orient yourself. Because once you get farther out, once you have more of these mnemonic devices, you can sort of go, oh, okay, this is where the moon probably was when this or that happened. This is what, this person may have a rising sign like this or like that. So, but if you feel like, okay, the morning and this and this, all right, that's all going to be the same, like you can remember that. So that's how I remember these things. And if you're born during the full moon, you're going to have the opposite sign. So that's another way that I remember these things. Anyhow, let's keep going because that's the big 3: sun, moon, and rising. The rising sign is a lot to do with what you look like, how you express. Moon sign has to do with your emotions. Sun sign has to do with your kind of outward expression, your masculine nature.
The way I help people remember in my sessions, which I find and is a good start, it's a good beginning point, is the sun. If we were to compare this to a house, the sun is like the base of your personality. It's like the kitchen and the living room area in your house. And the moon is much more like bedrooms. Like it's more private. It's more of where you can be alone and be more like some people feel so much more akin to their moon sign because it's that deeper portion of themselves that they can be and that they are when they're alone, right? So the moon is that, and the moon can also be relationships. Like we could do a whole episode just on one of these planets, but that remembering that moon is like it's the inside of you The sun is more external. And then the rising sign, like the front door. It's the first thing you see, it's the outside of the house. But one thing I will say about the rising sign that Kaylee also said, which I think is important about becoming more of your rising sign, is the rising sign also holds what I would call the natal promise, which is this idea that you came here to do something, and that thing is akin to, is locked up in that rising sign. And there's lots of things we can do to connect it to other places. But that rising sign is actually really important. I know a lot of people dismiss it and they're like, "Oh, it's not that important," but it is actually important. So
I love it. Okay, so there are multiple kinds of planets, right? We talked about there's personal planets, and then there's the next category is transpersonal planets, and then
social planets.
generational planets. Am I saying that right?
Oh, I might label it differently than Julie
Go
does.
ahead. How do you label it, Kaylee? Because I want people to be familiar with the language.
Yeah, so personal planets and then social planets and then either
Social.
transpersonal or generational planets.
Everything closest to the earth, like everything closest to you, and then a layer out, and then a layer out. So those generational planets are always going to be the planets that are furthest away from the earth. And the personal and social planets will always be the closest to the earth, which means the luminaries are part of those like personal planets, right? So the sun and the moon, that's going to be part of it. But then there's also things like Mercury, Venus, and Mars. So you want to talk about that? Anything you want to add? Then you can talk about the social and
Well,
transpersonal.
which ones are the social planets? What do you call
So
this? Which ones do you call that?
that would be Saturn and Jupiter. And well, you could kind of argue Chiron, but I think of Chiron as bridge. It's a bridge planet.
Depends on which part of its
Yeah.
cycle it's on, right?
Yeah, because it kind of bridges that, like, it kind of bridges all of the planets in a way.
And then the transpersonal or generational planets are Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, right?
Yeah.
Because Uranus is faster than I would consider a generational planet, so that's why I kind of like struggle with that one. But Uranus is weird in general.
Uranus is weird in general.
That's the definition of
Even
Uranus.
its own rotation and orbit is a little weird. It does its own thing.
That's Let's start with Mercury. What are some, and we're going to do this for all of them, what are some astronomical and astrological things that we need to be aware of when we're thinking about each one of these planets? And what do we need to be talking about? So let's start with Mercury. What does Mercury mean? What does Mercury do? How do we relate to Mercury?
Yeah, so Mercury is the chatty one. So let's just think about that. Mercury is the chatty one. Mercury has so many different roles, but he is always linked to communication, right? Communication, travel. He is the energy of the trickster. And part of the reason he got this reputation, or that this is part of him, is because he tends to zoom around the fastest, right? Like besides the moon doesn't count. He tends to zoom around like the fastest, and he kind of has this pattern where it seems like he's going from planet to planet giving messages, right? Like that's kind of his job. So he is correlated with Mercury, the messenger, and so he is the messenger planet. So when we look about like how you communicate, how you speak, the way your thoughts are going, the way you think. And one thing I want to say before I pass it over to Kaylee, because I know she has tons to say about this as well. She has really cool, unique things about Mercury, is that Mercury also, when people say, like, I don't feel like my sun sign. I mean, there's lots of reasons you can say you don't feel like your sun sign. But one of the reasons is if you're, especially if they're like, I'm an Aries, but I feel more like a Taurus or whatever. I'm an Aries, I feel more like a Taurus. Well, we should look at where your Mercury is, because Mercury is talking about how do you think? How are you thinking in your brain? And so if you are an Aries, but your Mercury is in Taurus, then like you're thinking in your brain like a Taurus and talking like a Taurus and communicating like a Taurus. And so it's very natural to think you are a Taurus, especially if your sun is in those latter stages. And Mercury, the way that he orbits, he can never get too far away from the sun. So he's very close to the sun. So he will always either be in one of three signs. He will always either be in your sun sign, where you are, what you are. So, like, say I'm an Aries again. If I'm an Aries, he'll either be in Aries, or he can be on the sign on the two other sides of me. So he could be in Pisces, or he could be in Taurus. but that's it. He can't be too far. He can't get that far out. So go ahead, Kaylee. What would you like to say about Mercury?
Oh, I'm so glad that you said that about Mercury not being very far away from the sun, because that's a really important point. And it's fascinating that like our thoughts and the way that we think doesn't get very far away from that core part of our personality and our connection to masculine energy. And in so many ways, thoughts are a more masculine energy. Anyway, with that example of like if your sun sign's in Aries, like your Mercury can only be in Pisces, Aries, or Taurus. If you think about like, okay, how would someone who's an Aries, who expresses so much like passion and instinct and take action kind of energy generally, like, okay, how is their brain functioning and their communication style if it's in Pisces versus it's in Taurus versus it's in Aries? And you can start to see how people get flavored and how things start showing up for them. But another thing that I really wanted to say about Mercury, like mythologically, Mercury was the messenger of the gods, and he would go back and forth between the different gods, but also between the gods and mankind. And Mercury can kind of be similar in that it can be this messenger, this bridge even between the divine and the seemingly mundane. And he can also function as a bridge between masculine and feminine energy because, well, for a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons is that Mercury, um, it's almost like Mercury can switch sides, which is kind of funny. Like Mercury can be kind of masculine, Mercury can be kind of feminine, Mercury can kind of be neither, kind of this androgynous sort of energy. And so there's very much this bridging component to Mercury and this like, okay, we're going to get these things that are separated and we're going to bring them together somehow, even if it's just through information. And so there's a component of connection to like even the nervous system with Mercury. Um, Jayan, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, what does this sound like? Can see many sides connecting things that don't seem connected. Sounds like Gemini, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Mercury rules Gemini. Mercury also rules Virgo, along with everything else ruling Virgo, which is just to me silly that everything can rule Virgo at one time when it's the Virgin. But yeah, so Gemini is heavily influenced by Mercury. Everything that Mercury does is very very Gemini-y. And yeah, that's my favorite fact too, is this only one sign away from the sun thing. And when we get to Venus, that's 2 signs away from the sun. So we're still like these personal things, these personal concepts are always related to our masculinity, which is very interesting, and not related to our femininity. And that is very interesting to me too. So Mercury is also known as Hermes in all of the mythology. So just if you're tracking that, he's got the wings and the caduceus. So he's associated with healing. The winged shoes. Sorry, I skipped. I thought shoes. I saw a picture of shoes in my mind, but I don't know that everyone saw that picture in my mind. So I had to say shoes. Yeah, so he's very into healing, thinking, doing, taking action, being fast, zipping around all over the place, being whatever anybody else needs him to be too. It's very, very plastic, like Haley was saying, very much like however you need me to show up so that you understand, I can then take that information and bring it over here and help it show up and be that bridge, that translator. So beautiful, beautiful stuff.
Since we're talking about who he is in charge of, like you said, each planet is in charge of or rules. We talk about this as rulership, rules another planet or rules a sign or 2 signs. So Mercury rules 2, at least in most astrological systems. He rules 2 signs of Gemini and Virgo. But planets also have places where they have a harder time and an easier time. So when Mercury is in Gemini or Virgo, he feels good because that's his home, right? We call it his domicile. So that's his home turf. But Mercury does not feel good when he's in Sagittarius or Pisces. Why? Because those are opposing, they're opposite. Sagittarius is opposite Gemini, and Pisces is opposite of Mercury. So, whenever a planet is in the opposite sign of its hometown of where it lives, it will be in what's called detriment. and it's not very comfortable. So that lends to when a planet is not comfortable, that lends to difficulty. So like people who have Mercury in Pisces often will say, like this is something Elise Houston says all the time. She's always like, "Forgive my Mercury in Pisces." But like it could lend to somebody who gets off track when they talk a lot, or over talking, or just having some difficulties in that communication realm in general. Doesn't mean it's bad, but it's something that we want to look out for, is that detriment. And then another thing I wanted to say, they also have places where they love, love, love to be, even if that's not the sign they're in charge of. And for Mercury, it is the sign he's in charge of. He's exalted in Virgo. So he loves Virgo the most. He loves being there the most. He's amplified the most. And the place that he hates the most, he does not want to be the most in the whole world, then would be Pisces. Pisces has the hardest time because, again, it's opposite Virgo, where he loves the most. He doesn't like Pisces. He likes Pisces the least. So just throw in some essential dignities in there because I think it's helpful. Anything the two of you want to say about
I
that?
was going to ask if I could speak to that really quickly, because so my husband and I, both suns are in Pisces, but like my Mercury is in Aquarius and his Mercury is in Pisces. And so like I have a certain mastery of language and communication thanks to my Aquarius Mercury that my husband feels like he lacks. And even though in a lot of ways he's a great communicator, he doesn't feel like he is, because his thoughts tend to not be as concrete, and they're harder to put into words, and they're harder to put into writing. And so very frequently he'll be like, just nobody understands what I'm saying. Like, did that even make sense? And it's because these words sound terrible, like detriment. It's detrimental. Oh my gosh, it's terrible. But there's nothing in astrology that is truly bad. It can seem a little bit bad, maybe because of how it's presented. It used to be viewed more as bad in the past, perhaps. But even having Mercury in Pisces, there can be gifts there, because there are powers of observation that my husband has because of that. Like communication takes a little bit to get going, that serve him incredibly well and make him a very empathetic communicator. Whereas if his Mercury were in Aquarius, sometimes I get to the point a little too quickly and without emotion, even though I'm a very emotional person. And so sometimes I like run people over in my excitement about information. He doesn't do that the way that I do.
I think that's a great point. And just because you have a planet, if we go through this and you're like, I have Mercury in Sagittarius or Pisces, whatever, there are other things that can mitigate that and be helpful to that. And like Kaylee said, there's nothing is truly bad. It's just different from each other. It's just playing. So another thing to notice is like if you have Mercury in the first house, Mercury gets its joy. It's in what it's called. It's a joy in the first house. It loves the first house. So even if you happen to have Mercury in Pisces, but it's in the first house, that will uplift your Mercury. It can uplift a lot of that. But just knowing like nothing is truly bad. And this is just helping us to determine, just taking it with a grain of salt and helping us determine why we might have certain struggles in our life and where we can look and where our shadow is. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this a little bit, because it can help us do some of that deeper work.
Yes, I love it. I have, just a quick aside, I have Mercury in Cancer, and I can communicate a little bit emotionally aggressively. So I will just be like zooming in for the most emotionally true thing, and people are like, that's a lot. Yes. All right, so let's talk about Venus. I thought, and we started this before, I thought everybody's going to pick Venus as their favorite planet, because Venus is often everybody's favorite planet, because Venus is our Taurus planet, right? Let's talk about Venus.
All right. Well, Venus has a lot to do with, she's very connected to feminine energy as well. Like after the moon, you would look to Venus for feminine energy. And interestingly, in most rulership systems, besides the moon, she's the main female representative of the planets, which is why I developed a different rulership system, because that did not feel right to me. But that's not the point. Venus, in a lot of ways, can encapsulate all the different components of feminine energy, but the ones that she encapsulates the most, I would say, would be like love and sensuality and and just kind of this like magnetism. Like where your Venus is can show where you can be incredibly magnetic, where you can be very receptive, where and Venus also tells us a lot about like how you want to be admired, because it's not just love, it's also admiration. I'm happy for you two to chime in now at this point.
Venus, yeah, she's lovely in all the senses of the word. What I thought a lot about Venus was this pleasure aspect of her. She's a lot about pleasure. She's about relationships, especially your relationship with other women. She has a lot to do with what you like about other people, who you like, who you're interested in and attracted to, not necessarily in the same way Mars is. Like, we'll talk about that, what he does, but in the qualities that you value, because Venus is all about these values. She's very value focused. And what do you want to spend your time and your money and your pleasure on? And how do you lap up that time, that money, that pleasure? How do you relate to other women? How do you relate to your own femininity? Is often really deeply wrapped up in Venus. Just so people know, as we're talking about these dignities, right? Venus, who is she in charge of? She's in charge of 2 signs as well. She is in charge of Taurus. So she rules Taurus, and she is also in charge of Libra. So she rules Libra, which is more of the relational side of her, is that Libra side of her. So those are her hometowns. That's her domicile. That's where she has a good time, which means the opposite of those 2 places are her difficult spots, her detriment. So she has detriment therefore in Scorpio, because Scorpio is the opposite of Taurus. So she has trouble in Scorpio, and she also has trouble in Aries, right? Which is where she is right currently. She has struggles there, and so she can be really, I find, like in Scorpio, sometimes that can lead to kind of crazy relationships and difficulty with relationships and like intimacy, or like over putting, I don't want to say like manipulation, but like over putting like stock in that like intimacy piece. And in Aries, it can be like quick to fall in love, quick to fall out of love. Like she's very like, I'm here, I'm there, I'm gone, go and do. But she loves, the places she loves to be the most in the whole zodiac, that would be Pisces. She loves Pisces. She has that creationary energy. She loves to just spread her wings and fly. And then her toughest place in the zodiac is therefore the opposite of Pisces, which is Virgo. So her biggest struggle is Venus and Virgo, which can lead to kind of this attitude of pickiness and not good enough kind of syndrome for her. What do you think, JN?
Yeah, you said it. I find that people with Virgo Venus and people with Scorpio Venus often get together, and they often have a very interesting sex life.
Very interesting. Oh, Venus
Very
loves the 5th
interesting.
house. Yeah, she's a 5th house baby. So sex all the way.
Well, pleasure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, Venus is love and money embodied, right? So that's what we're working with is what do you love? What relationships are you in? If anytime somebody's like, I have a money question or I have a love question, that's the first thing I go to after, say, the 2nd and 7th house, right? Which is also what she rules. And you said it though. You guys pretty much did everything. She's always 2 signs away from the sun. And it's only Mercury and Venus that do that track the sun. And it's because they're between us and the sun, like astronomically, that because of our perception, because astrology is 100% based on perception, it looks like they're following the sun, but it's because we're seeing them and then we're seeing the sun, right? But she's always 2 signs away from the sun, or no more than 2 signs away from the sun. So it's always good to keep in mind. So you can never have a Venus Sun opposition in a natal chart. It's not happening. If somebody says that that's true, then you need to take another look at their chart.
They're using a different kind of astrology.
Yeah, or that. One that has zero astronomical basis. Yeah, but everybody loves Venus because Venus is the lucky planet. Venus is the happy planet. Venus is the I'm getting money planet. Venus is the, it is the relationship planet. Like these are the core things, 2 out of the 3 things, right? Health, wealth, and relationships that make us feel comfortable and safe. Venus rules 2 of those. So just keep that in the back of your mind. She's pretty important.
Hey friends, it's Julie. I'm just popping in here real quick to tell you about a very special invitation we have for you. If you have been feeling deeply called to learn more about your feminine identity or to see what feminine power really is, or you're just loving the podcast, then Kaylee and I would love to invite you to join our community, Feminine Alchemist. Inside, we host live monthly women's circles, challenges, and Wheel of the Year celebrations. They are seriously so much fun. We have monthly workshops where we bring in experts to teach on anything from menstruation to mythology. You'll also get access to our library of courses about astrology, intuition techniques, sacred embodiment, and cyclical living. And most importantly, you'll be able to connect with women who are like-hearted and walking the same path as you. So if this sounds exciting to you, join today by clicking the link in the show notes or going to femininealchemist.com. That's alchemist spelled M-Y-S-T. Okay, back to the episode.
Let's talk about Mars.
So Mars, our warrior planet. So Mars rules Aries. At one time, he did also rule Scorpio. That is traditional astrology, but he only has one thing that he rules. So he is in charge of Aries, and therefore he has this most struggle. That's his hometown. So the opposite of his hometown is going to be Libra. So he has a harder time in Libra. He is exalted. Mars loves to be exalted in Capricorn, which is very interesting. He is the let's go, get it done, ambition, which is all very fitting for Capricorn. So he's exalted in Capricorn, which means that's his best placement, which means his worst placement then is going to be in Cancer. So that's his toughest place to be. So in charge of Aries, has a hard time in Libra, most difficult time in Cancer, best time in Capricorn for Mars. And then his most favorite house to be in, I believe, is the first house, the sixth house. Oh, yeah. He loves the sixth house, which is funny because when people see Mars in the sixth house, they're like, oh no, you're going to have all these accidents. But Mars actually really enjoys the sixth house because, again, the sixth house is this like, get it done, do it every day. Here I am. Da, 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 da. So
You're
that's
gonna
a little
get
bit
stuff
about Mars.
done.
Yes. So go ahead, Kaylee. Tell us about Mars.
Mars is really connected to a person's drive and their motivation. If somebody is feeling a lot of like depression or apathy about life, a really good place to look for like, okay, what's going on here is Mars. Because if Mars and the sun in a lot of ways, but Mars in particular, if Mars is unhappy, if Mars, like if you're living a life that doesn't support your Mars, it's hard to feel lit up and motivated, and it's harder to take action. Because there's a lot of passion and a lot of drive in Mars, and Mars just wants to go and do. It's a very masculine planet. Like after the sun, it is, I would say, the most masculine planet.
Yeah, so along with that drive, I always think of Mars as being one with the adrenals. So if you have adrenal exhaustion or adrenal fatigue, check your Mars stuff, and vice versa. If you're like, man, this Mars transit is really messing with me, maybe you need to pay attention to your adrenals and see like how often am I in fight or flight? What am I doing with that? Also, though, with that, Mars is the initiator, right? So we're going to talk about initiating things like sexual intercourse or any kind of spark energy when it comes to a relationship. That's a Mars stuff. So if you have good Mars placements with a person, that's probably a good indicator that you are at least the initial interest is going to be really powerful.
Yeah, he is often correlated with sex and sex drive in that like carnal, passionate part of ourselves. He's more primal. Mars is kind of, he brings primal energy. Like Kaylee said, he is about how do you do things? How do you get stuff done? Where is your willpower? What do you want to do? Like, what do you actually want to do? And how are you going to do it? He also, of course, is linked to, he's the god of war. So of course he's going to be linked to conflicts in our lives, irritations in our lives, as well as the way we fight. Like, how do we fight? So my Mars is in Virgo. So to me, it is incredibly important to be logical in my fighting. It's very like, this is how it is. This is the argument. This is what we're going to lay it out. Right. So that Mars will tell you how do you fight, which can be important if you're trying to fix things communication wise, looking at each other's Mars. How are you guys fighting, and trying to understand how to come together on that and ease on that.
Oh, I just thought of another really important thing about Mars. Your Mars placement tells you an area where it's so vital for you to advocate for yourself, to stand up for your needs and for your wants. Because if you don't, it's going to sap a lot of life out of you. So wherever that is, wherever your Mars is hanging out, that's a key point where it's like, you've got to advocate for yourself.
I love it. I love it. I have Mars in Capricorn in the 12th house. So conflict for me is strategic and intuitive. It's very, very strange. If something happens and I'm in conflict, I just kind of go, and I wait. There's a lot of waiting involved, which is not a Mars thing to do, is the waiting, but fun. Very fun. I love that you shared your information, Julie. But let's talk about Jupiter. Jupiter is another one that people love to look at, love to obsess over, and love to, oh, this is what Jupiter is doing, so there's some fun stuff that's going to happen. And why is that, Kaylee?
Well, Julie, do you want to talk about his essential dignity first?
Yeah, so I'll
Tell us about that first.
Yes. So Jupiter, he is in charge of Sagittarius. In traditional astrology, he was in charge of he was in charge of Pisces as well. So he does like Pisces, just like Mars does like Scorpio, because he used to be in charge of those places. So, which means he has a harder time in Gemini, which is where he is now. That's where he is in detriment. Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini. And then Jupiter, his best place that he loves to be the most, he's exalted in Cancer, actually, which I love because I'm a Cancer. But he's going there. Jupiter is about to switch from Gemini to Cancer, I think in July, the end of June or July. So it's exciting for all of us. And then the worst place for Jupiter to be, therefore, then is Capricorn, because it's the opposite of Cancer. So that's his hardest time. Hardest time in Capricorn, best time in Cancer, and then detriment in Gemini, and then hometown Sagittarius. His favorite house that he gets the most joy out of is actually the 11th house. So he loves that 11th house. He loves to like chat and make connections and put everyone together and like network. That's Jupiter. So tell us about Jupiter, Kaylee.
That's awesome. So Jupiter is the great expander. Jupiter makes everything bigger, whether you want it bigger or not. Like, if you're focusing on something and Jupiter is involved, he's like, oh yeah, let's make that bigger. So there's abundance connected with Jupiter. There is luck and there's good fortune. There's graciousness and gratitude and generosity. And also there's things like overwhelm and excess, like going to extremes, because Jupiter just likes to blow things up, which is fitting because as a planet, Jupiter is gigantic. But yeah, there's kind of this jovialness that can come with Jupiter energy. This shoot, I just forgot the opposite of pessimism. Optimism. This optimistic quality to Jupiter energy. But like the key to Jupiter energy, in my experience, is like watch what you're focusing on, because that's what he will expand.
So cool. So cool. What are some of your experiences with Jupiter placements, or, a story maybe a client had or you have personally?
Well, one thing I do want to say about Jupiter along this vein, and then I'll talk about some placements, but is that Jupiter is also about belief systems. He can rule over our views, our cultural views, as well as like religious views and books. He loves books and like just thought in general. He loves like higher learning because he's associated with the ninth house, right, of higher learning and religion and spirituality. So sometimes going to a Jupiter line, right, will change someone's, I have seen it change someone's religion, their worldview, their thought, the way that they're exploring cultures and things like that. So if you've got Jupiter in the ninth house, likely those things are big for you. Things like travel, foreign entity, like expanding your experience with other cultures. You probably have this drive to like go somewhere and explore and to learn, whether or not that's in your mind, like higher learning in your head, or physical. Most of the time, I would say like there's always a little bit of a physical component, like wanting to go different places and travel, but it can be very spiritual because he is linked to that like spirituality piece. And then I'm trying to think about other placements that I've seen him. Honestly, when Jupiter and Venus get together, which we're going to have this year in August, it's a good time. Everybody get ready for a roaring good time because Jupiter just expands that pleasure, but he also, because he's over things like excess, then you're like, why did I spend all this money? I just spent so much money. I just like you can really indulge and overeat. He's very Thanksgiving-ish, like gratitude and like generosity, and then you eat all this food to excess and you're like, oh, so much food. So that's how I feel about Jupiter.
I want to speak really quickly to the fact that Jupiter is a social planet. So Jupiter and Saturn are called social planets because they're far enough out that their orbits take longer. So like Jupiter, he's got a 12-year cycle. So it's almost like their influence hits on a social level, and to a certain extent, what house your Saturn and your Jupiter are in can be in some ways more important than the sign because of that. I say almost more important because the sign is still important, but there is kind of this element of like there's a whole like micro generation that has Jupiter in this sign and Saturn in this sign, and you will all have similarities. And if you want to see how it plays out for you personally, then you take it to the house level.
Yeah, that's a super good point. And just so people know, we haven't really been tracking this because the other planets are so fast. They're moving constantly throughout them. It only takes a couple months. But this is the first planet we should mention. I mean, besides, we didn't talk about Chiron yet, but where it takes him a whole year to get through a sign. So when Kaylee says he has a 12-year cycle, it means it takes him 12 years to get around the full zodiac. And when you have that Jupiter return, so Kaylee's about to have her Jupiter return, which I'm real excited about for her. But you get the essence of that planet. You get that every 12 years a pattern will repeat. And so he brings this expansion and can bring leadership opportunities and stepping out into the world, which is really lovely.
Man, I'll tell you what, I had a Jupiter return last year and it didn't do jack squat. And my Jupiter's in Pisces in the second house, and I was like, oh, it's going to be great. No, it was crap. But I think it was because Neptune was in the exact same location and it was very confusing. So probably it did more than I thought.
Yeah,
Well,
but
and it's
now
gonna play
you're the
out for
host of
12
this
years.
podcast.
That's true.
And now you started a whole new thing, and you are the facilitator and leader of a voice that's just won a giant award. So
Yeah.
Fine, jack squat, you're right.
No, but like
I'm
frequently
just
with
kidding.
returns, stuff happens on a timeline that you wouldn't anticipate. It's not always like right at the return. That's when things maybe start kind of rolling, but sometimes it's later on when you're like, whoa, that was the start of something big.
Yeah. Fair enough. To be continued, right?
Though I understand the frustration. I've definitely have had transits where I'm like so excited because I think I might know what might happen, and then it's like, no, sorry, Kaylee, you do not know all the secrets of the universe.
But that's why I do this. So I can know things. Hey friends, it's Jayanne here. If you have been feeling really stressed out about the world lately, you are not alone. There's been enough crazy and fear flying around the internet that even I've been knocked off my rocker sometimes. But it's times like these that I'm really grateful for the tools I have to regulate my nervous system. I developed these tools for myself when I was going through the thick of it. My babies were young and I had a ton of repressed anger.
And these tools help me through other stressful times, including negotiating my own divorce, having difficult money conversations, and of course, the whole COVID experience. And I've put all these tools in a method I call the authentic self-care method. This is different than other self-care programs because it is a framework for you to find your special sauce when it comes to self-care. And let me tell you a secret. Step 1 is not take a bath, get a haircut, or go to the gym. Step 1 is regulate your nervous system. And that's exactly what we do inside the 3-in-1 membership. This powerful program includes focused journals and meditations you can do in just a few minutes, like the fight or flight session, the hippocampus session, which rewrites your ability to see new possibilities, and the vagus nerve session, which helps you regulate your whole body in a crisis. Using these tools, members have reported feeling more empowered, more expansive, and many experience relief from actual physical pain, all for less than $2 a day. So join the 3-in-1 membership now so you can learn these tools today. The world is not going to become less crazy. The only thing you can control is how you respond to it. The 3-in-1 membership will help you do that, so click the link in the show notes to enroll today.
Oh my gosh. All right, so let's talk about Saturn. Are we ready for Saturn, or is there more? We're ready for Saturn. Are we ready? We're ready for Saturn.
Yeah, we're ready for Saturn.
Saturn
The
has a
planet everybody
29
loves
and a
to
half
hate.
year cycle, and nobody likes it at all. So, Julie, tell us about the Saturn's stuff.
He's a hard one, that's for sure. He is a hard one. All right. So, Saturn is in charge of Capricorn. In the past, so he rules Capricorn, and in the past, he actually also ruled Aquarius as well, which is going to seem very curious when we get to Uranus, but there are lots of reasons for that. And Saturn, which means that's his hometown, right? That's his domicile, which means the opposite of that. Cancer is a really difficult placement for Saturn. That's his detriment. He has a harder time in Cancer. And then he is exalted. His best place in the zodiac is actually Libra, believe it or not. And people are like, what? Saturn likes Libra? That doesn't seem like they go together at all. But he is about order and fairness and karma and balancing the scales. So he loves to be in Libra, which means his fall is going to be in Aries. He has the toughest time. So hardest placement, Aries. Best placement, Libra. Detriment, so kind of tough place for him, is going to be Cancer. And then his hometown is Capricorn. And his house that he enjoys the most, you're going to get a kick out of this too, is actually the 12th house. Saturn loves the 12th
Really?
house.
I did not know
Yes.
that about Saturn. And
Yep. He loves the 12th house. And people say it's because he loves tribulation.
okay,
And the 12th house is about tribulation, but and like difficulty. But yeah, Saturn is father time, and he's kind of straddling the energies of the veil and bringing karma back. So he quite enjoys being in that 12th house. So tell us a little bit more about Saturn, Kaylee, and we probably should talk about what a Saturn's return is as well.
Yeah. So I think of Saturn as the Lord of Karma, and Julie already touched on that a little bit and like his connection to timing. But if you think about karma, it's very much the sense of you reap what you sow. What you put out will return to you. And that's Saturn's energy. And that's part of why sometimes people don't like Saturn. I said earlier that like Saturn is the planet everybody loves to hate because he doesn't let you get away with anything. He does not. He's very much this like, you will learn the lesson and you will take it step by step. And if you skip steps, you will start over. And there's this discipline element to it and this self-mastery element to Saturn that a lot of people in our current society are like, nope. I don't want to touch that. I don't like that. That's limiting. That's whatever. And yes, Saturn is connected to limits. But if we had no limits, like we would have we'd have anarchy. Everything would just be falling apart. So Saturn is actually, I hesitate to say a gentleness to Saturn, but there is a kindness to Saturn in that Saturn is like, no, you don't understand. Like you can't do algebra if you don't even know how to add and subtract. You cannot skip steps. You have to understand these things or you won't be prepared for the next things. And so Saturn is often giving us reality checks. Like, hey, are you connected to what's real? Or are you living in some fantasy land where you think you can do this thing that like I'm sorry, you actually can't do that thing, but here are the tools and the steps to do that thing. That's Saturn's energy. And actually, I have a ton of planets in Capricorn, including Saturn. And Saturn is one of my what's called final dispositors. And what that means is that like almost everything in my chart comes back to Saturn and Pluto, which is a really fascinating experience to have everything come back to those two heavy hitters. But really, Saturn is just saying, hey, there are laws of the universe, and you can only push against them so long before you break yourself against them. So, how about you follow the laws of the universe, and I will help you do that? That is Saturn in a nutshell.
Yeah, I kind of think about him oftentimes as like McGonagall in Harry Potter, or like that teacher that like he's hard but fair.
Yes.
Saturn is hard but fair, and he is meant to make you a master. That's what he's trying to do. Like, right, he's Mr. Miyagi, like wax on, wax off, wax on. Like he is trying to make you do the thing over and over again so that you can master that actual thing. Like that's his job. He wants to make you a master at that thing. And I wanted to also say, when we talk about limits, because he can feel incredibly restricting. He can feel restricting. He can make you feel like you're banging your head against the wall or like you're stuck. Yes, he does do that. But also, those limits, like Kaylee was saying, there's a technique called ideation, which really helps us to get all of our ideas out. The best inventors and things like that use this thing called ideation. But the first rule of ideation is you have to have limits. You have to have a box. Like the box is actually important for getting out of the box. The box is actually important to make you come up with more ideas. Because if I just say to you, Kaylee, you can do whatever you want, then like it's hard for you to come up with ideas. You can come up with a few ideas and be like, well, maybe I'll do this or that. But if I give you limits, like it has to be in 9 square feet, and it has to be, be able to like warm people, and it has to do this and it has to do that, then you have to get more creative. Then you can come up with more and more ideas because you have those limits. So Saturn is doing something very important for us in helping us to create more by giving us those limits. And sometimes we hate that so much, but it's something we need. So I was going to ask Jan if you would be willing to talk about, like, because people have heard the term Saturn return. So should we touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So Saturn, like we said in the beginning, has a 29.5 year cycle. And depending on, different retrogrades and how he's moving, you might have it at 29.5 years, or you might have it like at 30 or at 20, like it'll range. But basically, when Saturn comes back to the original location where he was when you were born, it's something, it's that it's it's this time of your life where you don't have a choice anymore to put off certain learning. So things that you thought you could just kick the can down the road, now they're going to come screaming in your face because you have to learn to add and subtract before you can do algebra, like Kaylee said. So it's very poignant. It's very poignant. And so for me, for example, it was very much you need to like figure out what you're doing with career. You just have a something, do a thing, have a something. And it was that very same day was the first day that I started working for this one insurance company, and it was like that was what I did for like 10 years. But how are you making money? How are you being independent? And I think I have Saturn and Sagittarius in the 11th house. So it was like, how are you doing things? But people often fear the Saturn return. It's not something to be afraid of, but it is something to prepare for if you know ahead of time. And I was really lucky that I knew ahead of time. So I don't actually know if it was like good or bad, but I had to do much higher levels of algebra than I had even expected, right? Like I just had to like, all of a sudden this stuff came up and I was like, I thought I was prepared for this time of my life, and I didn't think Saturn was going to have anything to say to me because I knew it was coming, and I aggressively healed in preparation. And guess what? I still got surprised. So all that to say, like, shadow work is your friend, and like being really diligent about what you're here for and why you're here and what you need to learn. And that's why we do astrology. There's a second Saturn return that most people experience around 60 years old. So it's around 30 and it's around 60. So if you're coming up on that one, now you have a heads up and you can kind of get some things going. All that to say, like, it is in my mind, every time I think of Saturn return, I think of two disjointed pieces of a structure coming together, and it puts strain and pressure on the rest of the structure. But it's just because that's how it's supposed to be. And like, if you have a roller coaster that you've built, you want to have a certain amount of intense tension so that roller coaster stays up. That is a required piece. And Saturn returns just do that automatically, like force that structure into the right location. And it is not comfortable, but it is necessary. So that's my visualization on that.
Can I add something really quick about Saturn return?
Yeah.
I loved everything that you said. And there's just this idea of like, it's a reality check on your life. If you're in delusion in any way, shape, or form, your Saturn return is going to show you. And it's not always the nicest way to show you, but it's the way that it just gets done. And also, the Saturn return, it's a valuable component of your development as a human being. So before your first Saturn return, you're taking in information from society, from parents, from teachers, from coworkers, from people in positions of authority about what it means to be an adult, what it means to be someone who contributes to society. And then around your Saturn return, you start having these experiences where it's like, wait a minute, do I believe any of that? Like, what do I actually think about what it is to be a contributing human being, to be an adult, to be truly responsible? What does that mean? And what does that look like? And then between that and your next Saturn return at around 60, you have this opportunity to really develop, what do you think? What do you believe? What is a real adult? And then at 60, it's kind of this like, okay, have I been living that? How do I want to live that moving forward? Are there adjustments I want to make? And so I argue that none of us are adults until we're 30, that we're still children before then. And so, like, I just had, let's see, how old am I? I had my 35th birthday earlier this year. I have to think about how old I am. I've only been an adult for 5 years, as far as I'm concerned. And when you look at things that way, it's like, oh, that makes a lot more sense than us becoming adults at 18 or 21 or whatever arbitrary number that society has said. Saturn says 30 is what I argue.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I do think Saturn's return is, in many ways, the refiner's fire that allows you to emerge. So if you're going through it, it can be tough in the thick of it, but just know you are going to emerge. And it's another chance to take that leadership opportunity to let yourself be, like Kaylee said, learn who you are.
Just as a quick aside, if you were born in 1994, you probably already experienced your Saturn return. So people going through it, 95, 96. And then I talked about Saturn return on my Facebook page for a couple, I don't know, it was a while ago. And somebody was like, oh my gosh, my marriage is coming into its Saturn return and I'm having a really hard time. And I was like, oh, that's huge. Like, that's a huge realization right there. Your marriage is now an adult. So things can have Saturn returns, not just people, and paying attention to those celebrated times are really important as well and can give you a lot of insight. All right. Are we ready to get weird? Yeah, let's get weird, guys. Uranus, which everyone in my family makes fun of me for saying Uranus. I think it's the astrologer's way of saying the word.
Because that's the only way to say it where it doesn't sound questionable.
I know. I agree with this. But my kids even are like, it's Uranus. What are you talking? Or it's Uranus. And I'm like, that just sounds
okay,
like pee.
anus or urine? Like, what? How about Uranus?
Julie,
Anyway.
tell us about all of the like secret things that we need to know about Uranus. And then Kaylee, I want to hear about its orbit because you were alluding to that earlier.
Yes. Okay. So Uranus, just so people know, now we're getting into some of the modern planets. And so some of the modern planets did not have rulership until they were discovered or recently. And so they don't have like a joy. Like Uranus has not had, and we should just come up with one actually. Should we like come up with, it doesn't have like a house that's its joy, but it does have all the other things. So Uranus is in charge of Aquarius. So it rules Aquarius, which was previously ruled by Saturn, which is why I was like, you're going to be like, what? Why did Saturn rule Aquarius? Well, that's a story for another day, but there are reasons for it. But Uranus is in charge of Aquarius, which means it's in detriment in Leo, because Leo is the opposite of Aquarius. Uranus has its best time. Does anyone want to guess when Uranus has its best time, its best placement?
I feel like Sagittarius. No.
You want to guess, Kaylee?
Why is Aries coming to mind?
It's not, though. You think it would be something like that, but no, Uranus is exalted in Scorpio.
What? I didn't know.
Yes, Uranus is exalted
Oh
in
my gosh.
Scorpio. So loves making a little intimacy weird over there. Loves to dive in on the deep things. I kind of think of it as like Scorpio, and the eighth house is kind of where conspiracy lives and where like all the things get deep and so they get weird. So Uranus really loves being in Scorpio, exalted there. That's his favorite place. And his least favorite place, the hardest place for Uranus, is Taurus, of course, because Taurus is the opposite of Scorpio. So worst placement for Uranus, Taurus, which is where he is literally right now, and he's finally going to move out of. So yay for us. His best place is Scorpio. His hometown is Aquarius, and the place that's a little tough for him is going to be Leo. He does not have a joy. So that's what I got for you on Uranus. He does, I would say, like he likes the 11th house because that's where Aquarius lives.
So Uranus is the only planet that it's like the tilt. It rotates at like a 90-degree angle from the plane of its orbit. So it's almost like Uranus is like rolling along. So all the other planets, they have like a bit of a tilt. Uranus is like, woo, let's go. Let's really tilt things. And so he travels in a unique way through space. And it takes him about 84 years to orbit. I almost said orbit the Earth, orbit the sun. He does not orbit the Earth. He orbits the sun. It takes about 84 years. And he actually has a roughly circular orbit, which I didn't realize this. Apparently, the Earth also has a roughly circular orbit. I thought Earth had a little bit more elongated one. But I mean, I figure NASA knows what they're talking about when it comes to astronomy. I hope they do. But Uranus is a really intriguing planet. There's really intriguing mythology behind it. He's just kind of like, what? Where are you coming from? But Uranus, in a lot of ways, is like, okay, this is where you're going to let your freak flag fly. Like, this is where you get to choose into being authentically you in whatever weird, quirky, crazy way. But the biggest thing that sticks out to me about Uranus is he's about innovation. There's this sense of like, okay, this is not working. Let's do something about it. Let's change things up. And there's kind of this almost like humanitarian sense to things as well, because it's like, let's not just make things better for me. Let's make things better for everybody. And so where Uranus is in your chart is probably a place where like he's the awakener. He is the awakener. He's about sudden flashes of insight. He's about sudden changes. He's about surprises, both good and bad. And so if you're asleep, figuratively or literally, he is going to come along and say, hey, wake up. There's stuff you need to know. There's stuff you need to do. There are realizations you need to be having.
Beautiful. Uranus wasn't discovered until 1781, which I think is really interesting because it's right around the time of the American Revolution, the French Revolution. Like, this is a revolutionary time, and Uranus is the planet of total revolutions, population changes, explosive innovation. And one of the things that I say, and this doesn't quite apply to Uranus because Uranus has been around the sun a couple of times since we've noticed him. But oftentimes we get obsessed with trying to extrapolate in the past of planets that that they didn't know about. And I have a little bit of an ethical dilemma with that because they didn't know that planet existed. So how can you like retroactively project what's going on with that. And so whenever somebody talks about Uranus or any of the other planets before they were discovered, just always take that with a grain of salt, because the consciousness at the time was Saturn rules Aquarius. And you have to be in the state of mind of a person who was living at that time and not. I had a history teacher who said we can't judge previous societies by today's standards. And I think that's true for astrology as well. So 1781, total revolutions.
Yes.
Yes,
And I really oh,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was
Finish.
just going to
Much to
say, I
say
really
about
quickly
this.
want to speak to the piece about, so Uranus is the first of the generational planets, you could say, the transpersonal or generational planets. They are planets that are far enough out that they have an impact on an entire generation. There's an
Mhm.
entire generation who has Uranus in this location, Neptune in this location. Like it's in some ways the house, even more so than with the social planets, the house becomes vital for your own personal interpretation of those three planets. Yes, sign is important, but for how it plays out for you personally, the house is more important. For how it plays out for a generation, you will look at the sign. And so I'm like, there's an entire generation that has Uranus in Capricorn. They are going to have a certain mindset, a certain way of approaching things that are Uranian, that another generation isn't necessarily going to have. And that's true with all of those generational planets.
Yeah, so what might look like, to give context, is like, to use that example of Uranus and Capricorn, is it does give this sense of independence, like people who want, instead of, because Capricorn is very focused on tradition and building things and longevity and all those kinds of things. With Uranus there, it's shaking all of that up. And so more likely to take chances, more likely to be a rebel against systems, want to break up and make new systems. That's very Uranus and Capricorn kind of energy. And I often think about Uranus as the Tower card, if you're familiar with the tarot, because he just is here there to knock. He's just going to knock it all over. He's going to knock it out and build something new. He's going to make something better for you in that way. But he is there to definitely shake things up. He does. I will say Uranus rules giant movements too. So like big movements, social movements, stuff that happens, that is what Uranus is in charge of. That he kind of takes charge, which is very Aquarian, right? That's why he's in charge of Aquarius, because Aquarius wants to do things for the collective. And sweeping big movements, revolutionary movements, like Jan was saying, very, very much in charge of Uranus. We also need to watch out for him when it comes to, like both of these ladies have said, technology, increasing technology, innovation in technology, new discoveries. All of that stuff is Uranus. And Uranus is also in charge of astrology. In modern astrology, he's like the ruler of astrology. So that quirkiness, right? Being out of the box, unconventional, learning new things, interest. I find that like when people are on Uranus lines in their locational astrology, they just get interested in, like, there's just interesting people and interesting stuff and fascinating stuff. But he can also show us where we feel alone too, where we feel like we're too weird, we're too out of the box, we're too odd. And I know that a lot of people have talked about his correlation with, as well, not mental health, but things like autism, ADHD. What is that called?
Neurodivergence.
Neurodivergent.
Neurodivergence. He's
Yeah.
also involved in neurodivergence as well. So don't sleep on Uranus.
No, don't do it. I actually have done several videos about having, when you have neurodivergence, like really, really focus on that Uranus, be the weirdo that you're meant to be, because most of the neurodivergent issues are about masking and unmasking. And that's where you're going to be unmasking, is when you're working with Uranus. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to say too. Sorry, you reminded me. I wanted to say authenticity. Authenticity. Yeah. Uranus is huge for your authenticity and feeling authentic. And he helps us to, like we've said, let our freak flag fly. But we all need him for that. There was one more thing, but I can't remember. Go ahead, Jan.
One thing that, so when Uranus went into Aries in like the early teens, the astrologers were like, what's going to happen? How is this going to be? I don't remember when it was actually. It was like around then. What is going to happen? This is going to be like war, whatever. And one of the things that I think is the most fun thing that came out of Uranus and Aries is the selfie.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Because it's this thing that was meant, like having a portrait of yourself is this fancy thing for like rich people. And let's take wealthy like status symbols and make them commonplace. Like that's super Uranian. And to have it be like very self-absorbed, that is so Aries. And so I just wanted to share that with you guys because it doesn't always have to be like weird stuff. Like it was a social movement too. I'm going to take a picture of myself and post it online because everyone wants to see my face.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about, those social movements. And like you said, he is one who speaks for the people, right? Like taking he's individual because that's why he's linked to authenticity. He's so individual. I did just want to say it takes him about 6 to 8 years to go through a sign. So, and we didn't say this about Saturn, but we did say a cycle. Saturn takes about 3 years and Uranus takes about twice that time, about 6 to 8 years to go through a sign. So we can move on.
I love it. I was going to say that too, so thank you for saying that. Let's get into Neptune, which I also thought was going to be one of Kaylee's favorite planets on the world.
Just throwing surprises left and right.
How very Uranian of you. Yeah. Julie, tell us about Neptune's favorite things.
All right, Neptune. This is why she thought Neptune was going to be one of Kaylee's favorite planets because Neptune is in charge of Pisces. So he rules Pisces, which means that he has a harder time in Virgo. Man, Virgo's just getting it today. I was like, as I was thinking about this, I was like, Virgo, a lot of people have like fall and detriment in Virgo. But yes, he has a harder time in Virgo. He is exalted. His favorite place in the world for Neptune to be is actually in Leo, which is so interesting, right? Like that creativity, performer energy. Neptune is exalted in Leo, which means his toughest place is Aquarius. So his fall is Aquarius. So yeah, toughest Aquarius, best Leo. In detriment, harder spot for him is going to be Virgo because his hometown is Pisces.
All right. So let's dive into I love that I just said dive into because like Neptune was the god of the sea. So we're going to dive into the sea together talking about Neptune. But Neptune as a planet in your natal chart, it's all about attunement. What are you attuned to? What are you resonating with? What are you like entrainment? Like, what are you connecting yourself to and then beginning to move with? Neptune can also bring this very dreamy quality. So when Neptune is transiting sometimes it can feel fuzzy and like surreal. But another thing that's really cool about Neptune is that Neptune, you can track music trends and style trends by watching Neptune. Because there is this creative piece to Neptune and this he's very connected to music because of that attunement and vibration. But even fashion, I'm trying to remember some specific examples. It's been a while since I looked, but you can actually track changes in music style and even fashion as Neptune switches signs, and it's super, super fascinating.
Love it. Neptune is the divinely inspired creativity. So where like Leo is like, I'm going to be creative as a human and like, this is my vulnerable creativity. Neptune is like that creative force that comes through us that we don't even like when that dancer is just dancing and doesn't even know what they're doing. And all of a sudden they're doing the most incredible dance and they're transforming into a totally different being. That's Neptune creativity. Mm-hmm. That's more of a channeling energy than it is I'm creating something energy. There's less human involvement and it's more of I'm a vessel for this existence because Neptune is really, really the planetary embodiment of like the divine, the actual divine, right? A lot of people go, that's God right there. Boom. So that's what Neptune does. Neptune has a bad rap too, because wherever Neptune is, or if you have strong patterns with Neptune, you're going to often see addiction, just like with Pisces in the 12th house, because there is this transpersonal work that we all have is understanding the difference between intuition and addiction and escape. and illusion, divine and illusion. Where is that line? And we don't know. And that's why we have this sort of navigation sequence. So that is part of the whole Neptune thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Like Neptune, you know, people don't realize, like, yes, he's associated with escapism, right? Like, we're escaping, he's fantasy, we're going into another reality, we're going into another dimension with Neptune. And so, when we're doing that, a way that we do that as humans is addiction. Oftentimes, we get locked into addictions. And so, we just have to be careful about that. The other thing that Neptune can do is he can get you entrenched in things because he is so watery. He can sometimes, depending on who he's paired with, make you feel like you're trudging through the mud a little bit because everything's so unclear. You just can't see anything. It's so foggy. He causes kind of this fog, and you just have to trust and like buckle down and trust when it comes to Neptune. But although he's also very artsy, right? Like he is the art. He's like fine art, like we were talking about. Like when you're on a Neptune line, I always say like Neptune lines are great vacation lines for people to like go to because you lose track of time. Time doesn't exist. And it's lovely and watery and artsy and romantic, right? Like he can make this kind of, put these rose colored glasses on us. He happens to, like, he creates rose colored glasses, but he is locked into spirituality, spiritual experiences, exactly what Jan was saying, that divine guidance, peace, dreams, visions, and alternate realities and timelines are all going to be tied into Neptune. So he does help you understand where you might have some spiritual gifts and also where you might have some addiction issues, some slipping issues where you're not connected to reality, right? Like he's the opposite of Saturn in that way where he kind of disconnects you from reality, but he does give us this lovely, he's a great fit with Venus. He and Venus have been working together recently, and he's a great fit with Venus because he just expands, helps with that pleasure. He creates this lovely artistry with her and just focused on beauty. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say about Neptune is he helps us dissolve our egos. He helps us dissolve our egos. He's the dissolving of the ego, which sometimes can be dangerous. Like sometimes you need your ego. Your ego's there for a reason. And we get really down on the ego. We're like, man, the ego's the worst. Blah, blah, blah. You're so prideful. Blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, right, that filter between our conscious and our unconscious is there for a reason. It's there to protect us. It's there to help us. And so, but he does help us dissolve our egos, let go of those. He is connected with the unconscious and unconscious realms and the other side of the veil. How long does he take to get through a sign? He takes a long time to get through a sign, like 12 years, I think.
Yeah, about 12 years.
He's a 144-year cycle. So his returns are quite important. Most of us will never experience his return, but things that we know of, and maybe businesses and things, they will experience a Neptune return. So that's Neptune.
So we're going to go forward into Pluto, but I want to sort of segue and just more highlight, because Neptune and Pluto are the two most generationally defining planets. And so I just want everyone to kind of orient their minds towards that. Like, once again, our placement of Neptune and Pluto has more to do with the house than the sign. And the sign that you're in, when it comes to either of those, is going to be more of a sign of your generation and more of a sign of your times. And I really, really harp on that when it comes to Pluto. So, but tell us about the things, Julie, with Pluto.
Oh, Pluto. I love Pluto. Love me some Pluto energy. Okay, so Pluto is in charge of Scorpio. He is in domicile there. He loves Scorpio, which means the opposite of his hometown, right? Like his rival town, his rival place to be is Taurus, right? Because Taurus is the opposite of Scorpio. And then Pluto is actually exalted in Aries, believe it or not. Yes, he loves the self because he loves that action of dissolving and creating, transforming. And Aries is like, I'll just do it, like let's just get it started, So he is exalted. That's his favorite place to be, is in Aries. And then Pluto, his least favorite place to be is in Libra. He has a tough time, which I should say there is a big generation of people with Pluto and Libra right now who I feel like a lot of them have been expressing that, right? This has been expressed, this difficulty in Libra. So, worst placement, Libra. Best placement, Aries. His rival town, his detriment is Taurus, and his best place to be is Scorpio. And he does not have a house that he loves to be in because he was discovered much later. So there you go for Pluto.
I love Pluto. And also with Pluto, especially people who have like a lot of experience with Pluto energy, there's this love and also this fear that can come in because we know what Pluto is capable of. And Pluto is about evolution. Pluto is about death and rebirth, dissolving and evolving. And Pluto is also about power and what power truly is. And so, where Pluto is in your chart, it can be an indicator of an area where you may be prone to power struggles, where you're being asked to step into your true power, but maybe you're not out of fear. And so, instead, you're like butting heads against somebody else's power. Pluto also is connected to like the deep dark of things, and that can be the deep dark fertile beautiful things of growth and like development. It can also be the dark terrible things like abuse. Where Pluto is in your chart can be an indicator of where you may be prone to experiencing abuse or even perpetrating abuse. If we want to get really real, because of that power element, like how are you using your power? Do you feel confident in it? Is it just a part of you? Or are you afraid of losing it? And so you want to take somebody else's power? That's a big question around all things Plutonian, is that power piece. And also there's a certain vulnerability. There's a rawness and a viscerality, a very like in the deep depths of your body, the deep depths of your psyche, and an intensity. So when Pluto takes a very long time, over 200 years, to make a full orbit of the sun, to go through all of the zodiac signs, and whatever he touches is never the same. So if like whatever area of your chart he has transited throughout your life, there's been transformation, especially if there are planets there, but also even if there are only signs and houses. It's this like volcanic activity of like, we are going to melt this down and we're going to spew this out. And then we're going to leave this here as the new Earth almost.
Yes, I love it. Pluto also rules like all of psychology, right? So Kaylee talked about like the deep psycho stuff. Like Pluto wasn't discovered until 1935. So after 1935, there was all this like explosion of understanding the psyche, this explosion of what are we made of if it's not just like get up, go to work, do the things, right? Like follow this the formula or, you know, work hard and all. What else is there? And that's when the question even started. Then there's also power struggles, right? Like what happened immediately after we discovered Pluto was there was a major power struggle in the world, global power struggles. And so when I look at Pluto, I'm looking at Pluto in the context of what's going on, right? Like there's so always like the generational, that is to me the generational planet. Whenever people talk about like generational struggles of like baby boomers and millennials and blah, blah, all that stuff crap, it is literally one for one. Where they say the generations shift is where Pluto changed signs. It is straight up. Like I have obsessed over this. The only one that somebody would be like, no, that's not true because baby boomers were like 1945 until 1965 or whatever. Halfway through it changed signs, and that's where like Generation Jones versus like the original baby boomers made that, because they're just a huge time frame. Anyhow, all that to say, like the struggles that we experience as any generation is directly correlated, is directly reflected by Pluto. And Pluto, more than anyone, because it's one of the more recently discovered planets, it's one of those ones where I struggle when people go, oh, well, in 1754, Pluto was in this sign, and so that's similar to now, and blah, blah, blah. And like, be careful. Be careful making that correlation. We can only play with data points where we have human consciousness when it comes to astrology. So be very careful about that. And I don't know. I don't know if there's anything else, like total destruction and rebirth, like the phoenix. all of that. That is what it's about. So we've had Pluto through the signs in the last several years, because Pluto takes between 15 and 20 years, sometimes 25 years to go through one sign. So we get a really full complement of what it means to totally transform that. And what we can see, for example, is the last sign that Pluto went full through in that we've seen was Capricorn. And we've seen a massive transformation in business and in social structure. And what is it that we hold to be like societal standards? And that has like dramatically transformed in from the time I was 2008 until just last year.
Yeah.
What people consider to be like the right thing to do is totally different now because we have all this other new stuff. So go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Like, who was working from home in 2008, right?
Oh,
Like barely anybody. Now we used, we were very much still 8 hour, 40-hour work week, 8 hour work day. We're not that anymore, right? We're not that. We're completely different entrepreneurship. We've shifted because Capricorn is very much top down. There are a few people on the top doing the thing. A lot of our money comes from traditional sources like the government and like these industries that's been around for a long time, oil tycoons and all of that. Now that's not the way it is, right? Like there's such a huge shift, and it's rarer to find someone in jobs that you would have found 20 years ago. It's such a different thing. And I also wanted to point out with Pluto, well, I'll just mention one thing, and I'm sure Kaylee has things to say about this too, but that's why we talked so heavily about Pluto and Aquarius. That's why it was such a big deal. That's why we talked about it when we did our year recap and everything. So listen to that, our beginning of the year episode forecast, if you want to know some more. But Pluto and Aquarius is going to be a total shift in societal norms, a total shift in the collective, how we think, our thought processes, and of course, total shift in technology, right? We're already seeing that. This is the AI revolution. It will
Yeah.
continue to grow. I did want to bring to the forefront though is Pluto is where our treasure is. So you've got to dig to get your treasure. He's your deep down. That's where your jewels are buried, deep, deep, deep down where Hades is. And that's where you've got to get them, right? You have to go deep down to get those treasures. And Pluto also is often associated, we talked about power, and manipulation, right? He can be associated with power, manipulation, but he can also be associated with the occult, right? With these things, these hidden things, hidden wisdoms that are deep down in the earth, right? These things that we bring forward, like astrology, like the feminine in general. So Pluto is, and I know Kaylee says this often, but Pluto does have the kind of this like feminine feel to him. He brings forward this feminine piece. And I think about that in terms of the story of Persephone and Hades and how he is the stalwart, like he's the only god who's like the stalwart husband to her, and like he's this really lovely, that's this lovely courtship between the two of them and allows her to be the true queen of the underworld. And so Pluto with that underworld, that's where we've got to go. That is the feminine journey. And so it's an important data point where your Pluto is. If you want to take the heroine's journey, your Pluto is going to be a really important data point about where you're changing, where you're going, where your treasure lies, where your own personal power lies, and your gifts that are insane, your gifts that are out of this world, as well as, he has wherever he's trining, man, pay attention to where he's trining and where his sextiles are, because that's going to give you power, right? A lot of power. So go ahead, Kaylee. I know you have many things to say about this.
Well, there are mostly two things that I want to touch on right now. One of those is that, like, on a more personal note, like, if you want to know about Plutonian energy, look at what you have in Capricorn, because from 2008 until recently, that's what Pluto was transiting. That was what Pluto was dissolving and evolving for you personally. And so, like, for me, I have 5 planets in Capricorn. I know Julie has a lot of planets in Capricorn. And like I graduated from high school in 2008 and went into a world where there was a recession. And my life from that point until even now has been almost nothing but like death and rebirth. And so if you have a lot in Capricorn, or you have a lot in Aquarius and you're looking forward to Pluto just drilling down into a lot for you, just keep in mind that this is soul level work. And yeah, sometimes it's going to be hard and sometimes it's going to feel like it really sucks. But also there is treasure on the other side. And there's beauty and there's rebirth. And there can be that through the process as well. You don't have to wait however many years for Pluto to get out of that sign. It can happen in the thick of it. And with that is my other point, and it has to do with astronomy. Astronomy, astronomical discoveries, I really do think mirror changes in human psyche. And we discover things out in space and details out in space as we are changing and evolving as humanity. So, like, we've known about Pluto. Pluto was considered a planet. Pluto got demoted. But, you know, this 90s babies always thinks that Pluto's a planet. And I'm an astrologer, so I always think Pluto's a planet. But more recently, like, we discovered that there is a heart shape on Pluto. There's a heart. And it really brings to mind this idea that, like, even through the death and the rebirth, there is this core of love. And there's this unconditional love, an energy or a being, a person, anything that can see you through those deep, dark depths until you come up into the light. That is a thing or an energy that loves you unconditionally in the truest sense of that phrase. And Pluto, at its deepest, deepest, deepest level, is about vulnerability. And am I safe to be truly seen and known? And am I loved and held in that? And so that's like the biggest message of Pluto, that, like, if you take nothing else about Pluto from this, like, I would love for you to take that.
I love it. What, if any, like, aspect patterns do you have with Pluto? And if you want to share about your own Plutos.
I was going to say this, but then I didn't, because it's risky. It's a risky thing to say. But I have Pluto, it trines my Mercury. So it is the gift that I've been given to be a powerful speaker and for people to listen when I talk and to be able to transform people with my words, and that my words can be healing to people. And I'm sure they can be death to other people. They can death and rebirth and poke and prod. But I have found that, you know, I don't know, for me, that was just that discovery for me was like, oh, that makes sense. Cause I also have Mercury in Cancer. And I was like, I feel like that doesn't explain everything about the way I talk. But that support, I have a lot of support to my Mercury, and that support from Pluto has been really transformational for me. And then as well, it's in my first house. Of course, it's in Kaylee's first house. We were both born in the Pluto and Scorpio years. And so for me, and I'm sure for Kaylee too, I feel like my ego and sense of self is always being like dying and being reborn 100% of the time. Like, I'm like, I got it. I got something. And then it's like, wow, you have nothing. So it is a constant roller coaster that I am always completely changing and transforming all the time. So that's what I would say. And one more thing I want to say about Pluto transits is, yes, Pluto is also death, like actual real death that does happen with Pluto transits. And when Pluto recently transited my moon, which is a very personal planet, it transited my entire emotional realm, my whole inner world, my whole psychology. And I feel like I am, it was doing that transiting from 2020 until, right, like out. So all through law school, all through becoming, and has totally changed who I am inside, everything I look at, who I am completely. And I did feel like I was very dark during that time when it was transiting my moon. It was hard. There was a depression and a little bit for me. And while it transited my third house of siblings, we both lost a brother and a sister, lost my father-in-law, lost 4 grandparents all during that time. So it was deeply, that death played deeply into my life. And as it moved away, I did feel lighter. I did feel, especially when it finally was like, I'm finally in Aquarius for good. Sorry, Jan. I'm really sorry. But I did feel so much lighter. But I am so grateful. That's the thing, is like, it burned me down, but I am so grateful. I'm so grateful for the transformation. I'm so grateful for all that. And even with those deaths, there was so much beauty that has come out, so much beauty and transformation. that has come with each one of those deaths as well. And that's how the universe works. Like, as one life passes away, more doors open and new things come through. And that's all part of that transformation.
I love that so much. And like, for those of you listening and you're like, oh man, what's Pluto transiting for me? Like, there's only a section of your chart that will even see Pluto in your lifetime. You may or may not have planets there, and it's neither good nor bad to have planets there or not. It's just a different experience, and that evolution is intended for your good. And like Jan asked, like, talk to me about your Pluto placements and Pluto transits and stuff. And like, for me, Pluto is both my chart ruler because I have Scorpio rising, and it's one of my final dispositors because it's in my chart. Pluto was in the sign that it rules. And so parts of my chart all come back to Pluto, and my chart is ruled by Pluto. And so there's very much this energy of like, this is all of your life, Kaylee. And looking at my other, like, I have a lot of heavy hitters in Aquarius. I have some big things in Pisces. Like, most of my life is going to have Pluto transiting planets and transiting some big ones for me. And that's just how it's going to be. But something that I really love about Pluto, and it's not just because he trines my Vesta, which is about hope and like never letting the light of life die. But there is a hopefulness underlying, a resilience, I guess you could say, underlying Pluto's energy that is like, yeah, you're going to die and you're always going to come back. You can survive everything. You're like the cockroach of the universe. As terrible as that sounds, like, you will ultimately survive anything and everything. And that hope is never going to die. And I think having that connection to Pluto, and then also Pluto trining that Vesta, like, even in my darkest moments, there is this sense of like, yeah, and like, I'm going to still be here tomorrow. Even if I maybe don't want to be, I'm still going to be here tomorrow. And so Pluto can be a very powerful companion and guide for coming face to face with your own mortality, but also with your own immortality and how you can withstand anything.
So good. So good. My Pluto is in the 9th house, conjunct my South Node, which is a classic placement for hypersensitivity to the witch wound. So, yeah, there's that. And it speaks to this concept that I may have had a lot of abuse in previous lives, right? That's the concept that usually comes up. But having it in the 9th house just is like very pointed, like, no, there was a religious bent involved there. And I also have it in Scorpio, which it's a generational planet, right? We were all born in the same generation, guys. Did you notice that? But what that means for me is I am like never comfortable, right? The South Node is like, where are you comfortable? Where do you like sit and like get complacent? And for a very long time, I had to like make myself be comfortable, make myself sit and do nothing as like a practice, because otherwise I would just get too spun up in perpetual transformation for the sake of change. So being mindful of that has been really, really important. I mean, especially having the Pluto in the home sign of Scorpio, it's like, let's change because change. Why not? Let's just like get a new color, or like shave our heads, or like, I don't know, pluck our eyebrows too skinny for no reason.
That really was a thing.
That was a thing. Like one hair width. I didn't ever do it because I've never really had eyebrows, but it was a thing. It was a thing. So that's mine. So, and all I wanted to get out with that was like, you can see, like, we have very different placements and we have very different experiences with Pluto, even though they're all in the same sign. Even though Julie and Kaylee have it in the same sign in the same house, they're still having different experiences with Pluto. So just continuing to, because Pluto is the planet of like continuously digging, unearthing, and understanding. Continue to dig and unearth and understand like what makes you tick and how does that make you who you are. We'll talk about aspect patterns, I think, next time. So this is like a nice segue into that. The real question is like, how are we unearthing these things? And what does that mean for you? Yeah. What is one thing you guys want to leave everybody with, if anything? Do you have anything, any like final words of wisdom around planets?
I mean, I said my piece about Pluto.
I loved it.
But one other thing I want to say that, like, if you are really interested in Pluto and like the evolution of your own soul, a type of astrology that's really intriguing to look into is evolutionary astrology, because Pluto is like the big deal. Pluto and the nodes are the big deals in evolutionary astrology. And so, like, if you feel ready for that, I do not remotely claim to be an expert in that. I'm an utter novice at evolutionary astrology, but just learning a little bit completely changed my life, actually, because my Pluto squares my nodes. And like wherever Pluto is basically like that is where your soul wanted, according to evolutionary astrology, that is where your soul wanted to evolve in this existence, however you think about this existence, whether you believe in reincarnation or not. That your Pluto is like, that's the area you focus on in order to level up and develop your soul further. But because my Pluto squares my nodes, if I focus too much on that, I'll actually stagnate. If I focus too much on evolution, if I focus too much on death and rebirth, I will stagnate and live out old patterns over and over and over and over and over again. And so the key is directly across from my Pluto, which is in Taurus. And so for me, true evolution is this marriage of Pluto energy, but also I have to bring in the body. I have to bring in sensuality. I have to bring in somatics and just like pleasure and joy and a little bit of lightness, or I will just play out the same patterns over and over again. And so if you do feel like, oh, wow, I'm stuck in the same things over and over again, evolutionary astrology might be a really good place to see if maybe there's something there for you.
Yeah, I think that's wonderfully said, Kaylee. And there's so much about planets. And I hope people noticed as we went through, like, planets are different than signs. The energy mirrors each other and it's similar, but it is different. They have their different flavors. They have what they bring to the table. They are the players, right? They're the players in your life. They're the actors. And so they help you. Seeing where they are can give you so much information about yourself and who you are, where you're going. And that's why when we get into transits, it gets so powerful because then we understand the interplay of how is now affecting you. And so my challenge to everyone listening to this is go map out your chart. So Kaylee has like a beautiful thing for this, but you can find it online, is just find an empty chart, like an empty birth chart, and then go completely map it out. What I mean by that is go draw everything in your chart. So pull your chart up on whatever it is that you use, Astro Gold or Astro-charts or astro.com, whatever it is. Find the circle chart. Look at the circle chart and map it out. Map out where the signs are, map out where your planets are, map out where the houses are, and you will deeply understand. You'll start to really understand, okay, this is what's happening to me. And as you're doing that with the planets, try to have an experience with them. Try to ask yourself, maybe re-listen to this episode a couple times and go back and look up a few blog posts. They're out there. There's so much information out there for you. But go and see, oh, all right, well, I've got Mercury in the second house. What does that mean for me? Oh, my Mercury is in this sign. Okay, that's one of the signs that they said was a good spot for Mercury. So just have your experience with each of those planets. And I promise if you do that, it really will enhance your life. It'll enhance your understanding of yourself. And you'll find you're always, even if you know your whole chart, even if you're like, I've been doing astrology forever and I know everything about my chart. I don't care. Do it again. And if you do it, I promise you'll have a new experience. You'll learn something new and you will deeply enhance your living, the way you're living and your reality.
Yeah, I just want to give like a second witness to that. Like when I first started studying astrology, like I understood a lot and it was valuable to me, but it wasn't until I actually mapped out and basically told the story of each of my planets. And like I mapped out the signs and I mapped out the houses by hand and put in colors and like wrote out the story of each planet and its interaction with everything else it was interacting with, that it like astrology just sank in so fully. And I was like, I got it. And I actually went through that process twice. I spent hours every night for like a long time. My husband will attest to this, deeply living in my chart in that way. And if you want an experience that helps you develop your understanding of astrology and yourself by leaps and bounds, I highly recommend that practice. Highly recommend it.
I love it. It seems like we have some beautiful homework for people listening at home. If you map your chart, we want to hear about it. So please send us a message at Feminine Alchemy Podcast on Instagram or email one of us. I don't know. There's links in the show notes all over the place. And we want to hear about your experience. Like that would be so cool if you could tell us about that. Because this sounds like such a fun practice. I've never done this. I've never heard of doing this. So you've opened my eyes. I love it. Well, thanks so much for listening, everybody, and to this lovely extended version on the planets. I hope you got a lot out of it. This was probably the equivalent of several classes. So you guys got a whole lot of value. And if you feel overwhelmed, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. This is recorded. Come back and listen to it again another time, and you will get more out of it every time. So anyhow, with that, I hope everyone has a great week, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. Please make sure to give us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening and share with someone you know. See you next week.